Welcome to the Helix webinar series. For those that don't know, we've been running these live prompting sessions now for quite some months. Normally it's Kaf and I. We're always looking for guests, not just our own. So if you have liked what you're going to see today and some of our past sessions, do reach out to us. But today we're very fortunate to be joined, obviously not just Kaf and I, but we've got LJ Longwing, who will introduce himself when he gets started. And we've also got Des Sanders. Some of you may have known I've worked with Des on the GPT agent series. We've now invited him back because we thought he was good. So welcome back, Des. Before I obviously hand over and we do introductions, and I suspect I'll give that hand over to Kaf first. Couple of reminders. We have the Q&A section of Zoom. So if you do have any questions during what we're going to be sharing today, obviously it's a very interactive session when we do these live prompting. If you can put your questions in the Q&A, up until that point, you will remain muted just so we can get a great recording for you. And at the end, we will roughly spend, if we have time, 10 to 15 minutes at the end taking your questions live. But that won't stop us from answering the questions during the session. So Kaf, if you want to set the scene and then we'll get started.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm really happy to have two of my colleagues with us today. When we met last time, we were talking about trusted knowledge sources and how you could bring in trusted knowledge using the Google Search API and decide which websites you were bringing in. That could be, for example, instead of ingesting all the Microsoft support site, you could actually use the Google Search API and then say, let's get answers from Google's search page. Another very big source of knowledge in most companies is SharePoint. And you could also think of other web pages that you don't really find in the Google search, but there you can ingest pages from a certain website. So for that, we have two knowledge sources, and we can bring them into our vector database, and you can then use the retrieval of that knowledge as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and LJ and Des will introduce themselves. And I think the first question we're going to talk about is what is actually trusted data source and why is that important? So LJ, do you want to present yourself?
LJ Longwing. I've been in the community for close to 30 years now, doing remedy stuff at the beginning, and got involved with HelixGPT some 2-ish years ago. So got in on pretty much the ground floor of when HelixGPT first started getting offered, and I've been deeply involved in a lot of the connectors, a couple of which we'll be talking about today, to ingest data into HelixGPT so it can use it as a knowledge source.
And when you say involved, what does that really mean?
Well, I was actually one of the primary coders on the SharePoint connector here that we'll be talking about today, to get the information directly out of Microsoft and transform it into a way that into a form that HelixGPT can look at and use.
And that's why I wanted you on the call, because you know every little piece of the innards of this connector to SharePoint. So that's great to have you. Des, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure, of course. So, hi everyone, I'm Des Sanders. I'm a solution engineer at BMC Helix now, actually. I've been working quite closely with our HelixGPT capabilities for about the same time as you, LJ. From its inception to where we are today, and working with customers to both help build up these capabilities, working with customers to start to adopt these capabilities. And I'm proud to be part of the whole fast start program where we're getting customers to adopt these capabilities at scale, leveraging some of the knowledge sources that we're going to be talking about today.
Great. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about trusted data sources. What is a trusted data source and what is not, in your view, both of you? anyone can speak out.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I think for me, a trusted data source is something that I believe is true, right? So where I've got data that's related to ticket data or knowledge around the core business that I can believe is true based on what I know, right? One of the key things for a trusted data source is a process which maintains the data source, right? So make sure it's up to date, make sure it's searchable, make sure it's easily accessible to the right people based on their roles within the business as well. So for me, that's one of the primary the primary things for a trusted data source.
Who do you think is judging if it's a trusted data source or not, or where is it not a trusted data source? Do you have some examples from what you've seen working with customers?
Yeah. So, I mean, more often than not, we'll speak to customers and they'll go, "I've got data in SharePoint and Confluence and HKM and RKM and all these different areas," and they want to bring this into the HelixGPT platform, which is great because we can that's the point of Gen AI, is able to understand this data at scale. The problem that they start to have is that you don't necessarily have control over all of those data sources, because if you think about SharePoint, I know we were talking to one of our customers in the Nordics. They were saying, when we search SharePoint, we started to search OneDrive and people's personal accounts within the business. So you immediately starting to have conflicting data, you have duplicate data, you've got a lot of information that could be untrue. In fact, there was another customer I was on a call with last week, and they've started to curate their SharePoint, and they created their own SharePoint site that they want to pull the data into. And as soon as we plugged HelixGPT into it, we immediately found that even though they had curated that data carefully, they still had duplicate documents in 2 different folders in that SharePoint. So it's really difficult to manage and maintain these locations.
I mean, what happens when you have untrusted data in a SharePoint? Let's say, like you said, I have an old document that is conflicting with the corporate policies. What happens when you ingest that in HelixGPT and you start asking questions?
Well, the biggest problem then is you start losing trust with your end users, right? Because your end users are the ones that are experiencing the problem. They're going, I've asked about my maternity leave within the business, and I've been told I can get 2 years off, when in fact it's actually been changed to 6 months, for instance. Then there's actually there's a business risk in that kind of information. So the repercussions could be quite dangerous if the information is incorrect.
Yeah. I see a note from Dave Davis here that there is no video or no screen. Is that what do we have?
No, I can see the front slide. I was going to ask LJ and Des, do you see the same?
I see the slide.
Okay, I don't know, because there's 2 people that have mentioned it. Maybe you can rejoin, or we're going to be sharing some stuff in a minute. If we can just get thumbs up from everyone. Actually, I might ask the same question now. Does everyone else see a screen? Then we know it's not just us seeing it. Otherwise, I'd have spoken earlier. There's a couple of thumbs. Okay. So if you are having any problems with the screen or the video, apologies. If you want to join back in, I don't know if it's your setup, but I can definitely see it. I would have been the first person to speak up and say, Kaf, I can't see it. So that gives me a good positive. We are recording this as well, so if there is a problem and you can only hear audio for whatever your setup is with Zoom, we will make sure we send this recording out. Okay.
Can you see the 3 of us as well?
Yeah, yes, I can see your pictures as well.
Who's got the white shirt?
Yes, LJ is different. He's not got the blue shirt.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's carry on.
Yeah. Okay. I think let's continue. If we sum up what you said is, what is the difference then if you have a knowledge base and if you're using SharePoint? Why is it a little bit more problematic when you start using SharePoint?
Well, it's a little bit more problematic because there is no way of processing, of creating a process around maintaining that data and keeping it up to date all the time, right? You've got no track all process, no versioning, those kinds of things. And if you think about your KCS methodology, when you're publishing documentation, reviewing your knowledge articles, making sure that they're maintained, make sure they're updated, that process is not easily enforceable across SharePoint. You could obviously do it in a manner, but it's a bit more cumbersome and tedious. Whereas if you're using a trusted platform like HKM or RK or those kinds of tools, it's inherent and built into those stores.
Okay, great. If we think about SharePoint, LJ, what if we decide to ingest documents? What really happens? What can you tell about what we're doing when we start ingesting data from SharePoint? How do you really get the data in there, and what is the process around that?
So, well, we use the Microsoft Graph API to access the data. So basically what the Graph API does is we use the authorization credentials that are provided in the connection, and we ask Microsoft, what are all the folders and documents within this SharePoint site? And if we get a folder, we dig into the folder and we get all the contents, and we get the contents. We crawl the entire tree, and we get the individual doc IDs of the folders and the files that exist in there, and then we create load steps for each and every one of those, and then we go to the SharePoint pages. So the ASPX pages that exist on the site, and we do the exact same thing, and we grab those and we create load steps, and each load step goes back to the API again and says, okay, I need the contents of this document, whether the document is a PDF or a docx or a text file or a web page. I need the content of this. And in the case of docs and PDFs, we grab the text out and we format it in what's called Markdown format, which is just a formatting standard. In the case of HTML, we parse the HTML and we grab the display text off of it. So we drop all the metadata, all the back-end pieces, and we grab just the visual data off of it. And it all gets stored in the vector database index and is accessible for people asking questions.
So essentially, we point to a site in SharePoint, right?
Yep.
And site is containing a lot of folders and documents and web pages. That's how SharePoint is organized, as everybody might know or not know. I don't know. You were talking about ASPX pages. That is the web pages, right?
Yeah. So SharePoint is essentially a web-enabled folder structure. So if you think back to just a file share sitting on a file server, you've just got folders and files. So Microsoft decades ago enabled a website sitting in front of that. And in addition to that, they enabled the capability of building organizational web pages to show, here is my organization's documents. Here are my calendar, here are events coming up for the organization and such. So SharePoint is really a big directory structure with a few web pages thrown in there to provide reference links to documents that are stored in there and such. So yeah, the connector just basically crawls all of that content and stores it.
Okay.
For HelixGPT.
Interesting. I've actually spoken to multiple customers, and they ingested their SharePoint site, and when they started to ask questions, they got a little bit of strange answers. Why was that happening? What should they have been thinking about before they ingested that site?
Well, there's a question on here from Richard Wicks that goes to that exact subject. So the SharePoint crawler at this point crawls the entire site. And Richard's question is, I only want to crawl a specific folder, not the entire site. Can you do that? And the answer is no. So the customer that you were discussing, what we found when we dug into it is people had what they considered their primary files that they wanted displayed to people, but then they had an archive folder that had 8 revisions of the documents and old copies of documents. And the SharePoint crawler crawls the entire site and grabs all of those documents. So currently the point that we're trying to make is, as Des said, we're looking to probably have curated content. So when you're talking HKM or RKM knowledge management, you have a publish and approval process. You have a versioning process, and the things that are crawled from those connectors are only the approved articles. They're only the latest version of the article. But when you're just talking a directory structure like SharePoint, there is no approval process of who can put what document on there, generally speaking. So you'll want to make sure that only the things you want crawled are in the location you're telling it to crawl. Okay. So the recommendation we're making at this point is set up a site that is specifically going to be crawled by a HelixGPT and has only curated content on it.
That's a good best practice recommendation then. Do we have any examples of that you've seen, Des or LJ? What are people doing in this regard? How do they handle that the Graph API returns everything in a site? Any? I can take one example if you don't have one, which I've been working with. You know, in a regulated organization or in a very compliant specific organization, you often have a document management system, a place where you put all the documents that govern how you run your business, your policies, your procedures, and documents that control your business. One of our customers have used SharePoint for those documents, but they have a separate site that they call the document management system site, where they only have created documentation. And they have ingested that thing and can then control it in that way. I think it is aligned with what you say, LJ, that you create a separate site for the curated documents, and that is what you ingest. That is one option, isn't it, to get the right information out. Of course, it is a little bit of work, but you really need to manage what you have on there. And of course, it would be nice to have a separate folder like Richard asks for, but we don't really have a way to do that. I think you could actually use the access control, right, to do something like that.
Certainly, the access controls. So another one of the questions I saw pop in the Q&A was relating to does everyone have access to everything? And the answer is no. So just like we do within HelixGPT, within Helix Knowledge Management and Remedy Knowledge Management, we do access validation. So when a user asks a question, it goes to the data sources to find out whether or not a given article answers that question. And if it finds an article that answers that question, it then does an access check with the source system, in this case SharePoint, to find out whether or not the user asking the question has access to the document that answers that or not. And if they don't, then that document is not used as a source for the answer.
Yeah. So you still ingest all documents, but when people ask questions, they can't really see the ones which were in that archive, for example. You mentioned they had 8 revisions of documents in an archive.
If the archive folder was set to restricted permissions, so only I have access to it, then if you asked a question, that document would not show up for you.
Which is kind of what you want to achieve. It's, of course, a little bit of overhead to have all the documents in the vector store if you're not going to use them all over the place. So that's why we eventually come out better if we do a separate site for it and that only contains published documents or whatever you want to call it. So then you kind of replicate what we do in knowledge management by moving documents from the editing site into the published site in SharePoint, and you get the same functionality. If we just touch on the web crawler, I mean, you can do the same thing. You can point to a website and ingest web pages into the vector store. Is that in any way different, or is that, I mean, it's the same thing there, isn't it? You need to have trusted data when you ingest.
Yeah, the technology is different, of course, because we're not using the Graph API to pull a web page in, but the general technique is the same. We go to given URL, we authenticate as appropriate, and we ask that page for the content. And then we follow the rules defined in the connection as to how we handle that data and the links in that data. And we crawl it and ingest it and convert it to Markdown and store it in the index. A major difference between, say, SharePoint and a general web page is there's no way to validate at runtime that the user asking the question has access to the source data. So if the source data is ingested into the database and the source is web, then any data that's ingested into the index is available to all users, as opposed to SharePoint where it does per doc validation.
So if you point to a URL of a website and it has many levels and it has thousands of pages on there, what happens then?
Depending on the configuration, there's what's called a crawl depth of how many different link levels you'll follow, and there's a budget, which is the maximum number of pages that will be crawled. But it will do exactly that. It will crawl up to its configured limitations and index all the content that it comes across.
Yeah, because a website can be huge and you don't really know there either what is trusted content, right?
It really depends on, as you said, you would hope that a web page is curated. But if the web page you're crawling is a forum with comments and a discussion forum, then obviously the content in that web page is less
reliable
than you might find on a corporate website.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in on this one. I think we all know what's on the web, right? So you want to make sure that you definitely know what is going to be published on those sites that you want to be ingesting. So whilst it's possible to do it, I would have a big serious think as to, do I need it and why do I need it? Is it that important that I go and scrape a website to pull into this information? We had a call with another customer of ours in India a while ago, and they wanted to be able to bring in SharePoint data, and within SharePoint they also had external web links that they wanted to bring in, and in order to bring that data in, they would need to then scrape all of those websites. What ended up happening was they said, well, if we do this, we're going to end up filling up effectively our vector store. And that would then confuse the AI. And the CIO said to the team at that time, why do we need this data in the vector store? It's not that important to us. So whilst it may seem like it's important to have SharePoint plus all the web links in there, it's not necessarily relevant information for what you're trying to achieve. So I would really have a serious think about what you're trying to ingest here.
Great. Time is running fast. I see a couple of questions here, LJ. We can maybe take some questions and answer. The first one is how does GPT deal with MIP encrypted SharePoint documents? And as you know, Microsoft is kind of protecting the documents and they can encrypt them and so on. Do we support that right now, or what is the thinking there? Is it automatically handled because you use the the authenticated user when you look at the documents, or how will that work?
I'm not specifically familiar with MIP encryption, but to speak generically relating to access to the documents, because we are using the Microsoft API, if the user performing the indexing, which is an Azure application, has access to the document and Microsoft is willing to provide the content of that document in what I'll just consider plain text, or in the case of a PDF, the binary format, then we have the ability to index it. So if MIP encryption is preventing that access, then we wouldn't be able to index it.
Okay, so we need to maybe work with Pratik here, which is asking the question to.
Yeah, I see both Pratik and John asked the same question there.
John is asking something.
Same thing.
Yes, asking the same question. It's the same company, to be honest. I know the guys. Okay. Did we have any other question we wanted to bring up now? Yeah, what happens when you delete the document?
So there's a checkbox within the job called delete sync. So basically, if that is enabled when a job runs, we first ask the connector for documents that have either all documents or all documents that have been modified since a given date. So there's a delta capability. But if delete sync is checked, what it does is it compares the document index with the available documents in the source system. And if there are documents that are in the index that are no longer in the source system, it will actually remove those documents from the index. So it's not real time by any means, but there is a synchronization process that can occur.
Yeah, when you run the ingestion job you're talking about, you do that maybe every day or every week, whatever you want to update the index, something like that. And
yeah,
then
you can run the indexing process manually or run it scheduled, and you can have it run whatever schedule you want. And because there's delta capabilities, if you're running it every day, when you run it the first time, obviously it grabs everything, but when you run it the second time, it says only give me the documents that have been modified in the last 24 hours, for example. So the ingestion process on deltas can be significantly faster.
And it is both deleted documents and updated documents that get updated.
If you've got the sync delete turned on, yes, it'll remove everything that's been that's no longer in the source system.
Okay, I think we should do a little bit of talking about how you set it up, and you show us a little bit on that.
All right, Kaf, I'm going to steal your screen share. All right, so this is the connector configuration for the. First off, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. This is HelixGPT Agent Studio. You are on, right?
Yes, in the HelixGPT Agent Studio, and I specifically went into the configuration, which is the settings, which is this gear icon on the right-hand side, and opened up HelixGPT connections, information sources. And I went into my HelixGPT webinar connection, which I set up. And the connection name is just whatever freeform text you want to provide in there for your own information. The client ID, the client secret, the site, the tenant ID, those are 4 pieces of information that you're actually going to grab from your SharePoint. So in this particular situation, I'm going to come over here to my SharePoint, and we can see that this is my URL that we're taking a look at. So if we take a look at the URL, my site is everything up to the protocol. So in this case, HTTPS. So my site is helixvirtualagent.sharepoint.com/sites/HelixGPT webinar.
Should the last slash be in there or not? Is that sensitive?
It is not. That can be in there or not, your choice.
Okay.
Okay, the client ID, the client secret, and the tenant ID actually come out of that comes out of your Azure. So in this particular case, I went to portal.azure.com, and I logged in as a Microsoft administrator for my system, for my environment, and I created an application. So in this case, I created an application called HelixGPT Webinar for today's date. And you can see right here on the general screen, we've got an application ID, which is a client ID. That's what I provided in my connection. We also have a tenant ID, which is right here. So I can copy that. I went into the client credentials and I created a secret. Okay, and that secret is right here. Okay, when the secret was created, I copied that and put it in there. And of course, as I mentioned, the site. So the 4 pieces of information I got were the client ID, the client secret, the site URL without the protocol on there, and the tenant ID. And with those 4 pieces of information, it allows the HelixGPT data connector to connect into the SharePoint site and index things. So the demo I want to do here today is I want to ask this chat bot a simple question. Okay, and I'm going to ask it what it knows about HelixGPT, and it's saying, hey, I don't know anything about HelixGPT because I have not given it any documents that provide that information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to upload a PDF that I have downloaded off the docs. I literally went up to docs.bmc.com, went to the BMC HelixGPT webpage, and created a PDF of those docs.
LJ,
So
while you're doing that, there's a question in the chat asking about, do we only index text documents, or do we index like process flows and images as well?
We indexed text. So so at the moment we're not currently processing images. So if you have, we've got a lot of people that have PDF documents with screenshots in them. We don't currently process those screenshots for the text within them. So as asked in another question, we process documents, so docx, PDF, and text files. So if the content is in one of those 3 types of documents or the web pages themselves, we will take that text and index it.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, so we can see here that on this SharePoint site that I have here, I just added this document, and I also have a web page. And we can see that that web page is oh so helpful. It has a headline, it has a body.
Interesting, nice web page.
So your content would actually contain useful information, but just from a sample demo perspective, I created a home page for the example just so that we can see that it does in fact index it. So based on the source information that I have configured here, I can go over to my data connection job, which I have configured already. That data connection job is an ingest data type, and it has a data source of SPT, which is SharePoint, and it has a connection ID, which matches the connection that I have configured right here. Okay, and if I simply say execute now, and I hit save, what that does is it kicks off a process on the data connection pod that is running in your given environment, and it does a crawl. So the crawl is the portion I mentioned earlier in which it inquires of Microsoft, what is the directory structure, what are all the files, what are the web pages, what are all the content that exists. And in this case, it found a document and a page, and the crawl finished. And we can see here that the load steps are in progress. And if I refresh this again, we can see that the load steps are now done. And if I check closely here, I can see that this is the doc, and I can see this is the page. I know this is the page because this is the site information, and it is saying this is a page, and here is the page's unique ID. So we ingested a document and a page, and we know the contents of the document we ingested was the HelixGPT BMC docs page. And I can come back over here and I can literally give it the exact same question I just asked it a minute ago before ingestion. And it will actually this time come back and have an answer because It now has documentation in its index that contains the answer to my question, and it was able to look at that information and provide a generated response based on the content source. And then also, anytime we're dealing with knowledge, it will also provide a referential link back to the documents that the knowledge came back, or that it came out of. And if I click that link, it will actually take me into HelixGPT's SharePoint site here, and we can see the PDF that the information came out of.
Nice.
LJ, we got another question around the SharePoint site setup. So the question from Joe is, do we have to set up a connection per SharePoint site? And what happens if we've got 100 sites, right? So before you answer this, I think there's a few things to think about here, Joe. If you've got hundreds of sites, you need to think about, do I want to actually bring all that data in? What data is that relevant that I need to bring into the platform? If there is something, yes, we would need to probably create a site, a connection per site right now to bring that in. But fundamentally, we need to go back to the whole process of curating your information and saying, what do I want to bring into the platform? Is it relevant to my end users? And if it is relevant, how do I put it into a single location or a primary location which is under control of my knowledge processes? So LJ, I'm correct in saying that for each SharePoint site, we're going to need to create a connection, right? So if I've got 20 sites, I'm going to have to create 20 different connections.
Yes, and the only difference between those connections would be the site that was specified in the connections. So as long as they are all part of the same corporation, they would all have the same tenant ID, and assuming that you were using the same client within the Azure, it would have the same client ID and the same client secret. The only difference between them would be this value here, which is the site. There is currently an enhancement request in to allow me to specify a parent site and have a checkbox that says also crawl subsites, because we have a customer that said, we have 150 subsites, but this is our parent. And they said that that's a lot of maintenance overhead to allow me to set up 150 different connections. But yes, currently it is a connection per site.
Thank you.
Great. I think it's time to open up if there are any people that want to ask questions verbally.
There's a load of questions on the chat still. Should we start with those?
We can maybe pick some of those, yes, to start with.
Yeah.
And we can turn on the mic for those people if they want to clarify what the question is about. You want to get started?
Yeah, so I'll start. There was one from Kelly Robinson asking, are there any common reasons why web crawling will not follow or ingest all links to other pages on the same site, as they found web ingestion to be a bit inconsistent with some pages being missed?
So literally the way the web crawler works is it goes to the page you specify and interprets the HTML and grabs a list of the links. And it will, as long as the link is on the same, domain, by default, it will crawl that. But one of the problems that you might come across is if your crawl depth is not sufficient, or your crawl budget is not sufficient, while it's getting its list of what pages it's going to crawl, it might find itself in a situation in which the page you're thinking of doesn't get crawled because it didn't get hit early enough in the process to be caught within the budget.
Cool. Yeah, I think that covered it. So, Kelly, if you've got any other issues, feel free to raise it with us. We can have a look at it for you, right? There's a question for you, Kaf, from Janice Dilworth. Hey, Janice, haven't spoken to you for a while, but good to see that you're on the call. Question about moving to employ Navigator. This is a product roadmap thing, I think. They'd like to add the welcome message and instruction to their users for Employee Navigator. When's this coming?
25.4, we have a welcome message with proposed prompt buttons underneath. So that's pretty soon. Within a month, I would say you can upgrade and have it in Employee Navigator. Yes. Is this webinar using Employee Navigator? It's using HelixGPT, which is powering Employee Navigator. I don't think you use the old Helix Virtual Agent chat UI when you download LJ, but it will work the same for Employee Navigator. So it's just different UIs to the same HelixGPT behind the scene. You know, we're using HelixGPT and Employee Navigator in DWP. We're using it in MS Teams. We're using it in ITSM. We're using it in BWF. All our agents use this ingestion capability from SharePoint and from web pages. So it is a platform capability. And I repeat this, I think, every time. The unique thing with the HelixGPT is that it is built into the Helix platform. You have all the capabilities of Helix, part of HelixGPT. And if you go for another chatbot or for another tool outside, they can never get inside the platform the same we do because we're built in there. So it's one of the very strong things that you share a lot of things and you have access to a lot of things inside the platform.
Cool. There's 4 more questions on the chat, so should we just quickly go through those?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so another one from Janice. Do customers index the intranet sites that are configured with SSO?
They can. Again, it is you want to make sure that the stuff that you're wanting to ingest is curated appropriately. But the web crawler is designed initially. Its first iteration was to crawl FAQ pages to get frequently asked questions ingested into the database. So it is a server-side static content web crawler. So if the web page you're trying to get to is a dynamic content that is not all static, then it's not going to be very good at crawling that. But SSO does not stop the crawler from accessing that. You just simply need to configure the connector with appropriate client credentials. The most successful one I've come across is log in via my web browser, grab the cookie that my web browser generated, and use that as a custom header in the web connector. And the web connector will use that same cookie to get into the website that your browser did, and it has access to the content. Obviously, based on policies from a session persistence and session longevity and all that sort of stuff, that connection might, that cookie might only be valid for 3 hours or whatever the specific site's requirements are. But I have not come across authentication as a barrier to crawling any given website.
Oh, that's a little workaround there, isn't it? All right. There's another question. So from Jet Antonio, can we create a form in front of the prompt so that it only crawls specific folders depending on what was answered in the form? For example, for the object being to avoid cross-contamination between multiple sources across multiple products and versions in SharePoint. So I suppose you're trying to put a filter in front, have a form that it will then just only bring out certain information.
So the short answer is not at the moment. We have a very similar problem with our docs page. So I'll go, for example, we've got 25.1, 25.2, and 25.3 documentation for HelixGPT, and we want to be able to provide that information in a chat bot. But we don't necessarily want to provide all 3 versions of that documentation to the end user. So there is discussions on how to implement a filtering capability interactive with the chat bot and the data source, so that the assistant, when it's querying the data source, can automatically add a filter into the query it's doing out of the index to only filter, say the latest version or something along those lines, unless specified. But that is not a capability that currently exists.
Lovely. All right. Three more questions. Let's go. So from Jeremy, we've got an on-premise instance, and they've got some lifecycle policies built into Kibana that clean up the indexes. If we're looking at ingesting data sources, would it be possible that lifecycle policies would end up deleting data that we ingest, or are they stored in different indexes?
So the index for HelixGPT is separate from, say, the full text search index that is part of the platform, for example. So it is in a different index, but I don't know how those policies are applied across your cluster. So within your configuration, you certainly have the ability to identify which index is the HelixGPT index. And I'm sure that the policies have the ability to specify exclude this index from these policies. But that certainly is something that you would have to research from an on-prem policy perspective.
Cool. Thank you for that. There's a question that says, since documentation in most organizations will evolve and be part of the LCM, documentation will most likely be conflicting between or within the documentation sources at that given time. So could we at BMC enable some kind of feature to do periodic cross-source sanity check on available documentation? So in my view, it's a knowledge curator for SharePoint. Is that something that we're looking at doing?
I will ask Kaf to answer that one, because
waiting for him.
No, I mean, to be honest, we really recommend using the knowledge bases, because there is this KCS process where you manage documents, where you actually handle this through the KCS process. If we haven't really had much ask for this for SharePoint sites to really curate the documents and build tools to create documents. That would be kind of add-on to SharePoint rather than something in Helix or HelixGPT. And I mean, let me know a little bit more what you want to do about this. I mean, create an idea on communities, call me or send me an email, and we can have a discussion. I haven't really been asked this question before, and I haven't heard anyone else asking for it. So let me know what you think about this. Why would you like to do it in SharePoint rather than in a knowledge base? And what would you be thinking it's worth to get such a tool? Because that's at the end, you need to tell us what it's worth for you and what you are willing to pay for it. Otherwise, we can't really invest in that thing. It's a pure business decision, I would say.
Thank you for that, Cole. Another question from Janice. How does HelixGPT work if the index documents are in Spanish, for example, and the user's preference is in English? Will the summary results be in English and the source document still be in Spanish?
So yes is the answer. So basically, you can do some research into vectorization, but the index that we store in is a vector database. So basically, all of the articles that are ingested are reduced down to numbers. And the search that is done against the index is a semantic search. So if you say, if you search for winding, if you use the word winding, the search will break your word down into the root of wind, and then it will search the database for a article that contains the word wind or word similar to the word wind, and return that article. And then the textual content of that article is then handed to the LLM, and the LLM is supremely capable of handling languages. So we have found that we can ingest an article that's in Russian and then ask it a question in Swedish.
And I haven't tested that. I don't want the Russian document, to be honest. It's political, but I can't stop saying that. But take another example.
Ingest an article in Spanish and then ask the question in English. And the LLM has the ability to translate the source material from its source language, the question in the source in the question language, and then provide an answer in the appropriate language back to the user of what they asked in. So if you're asking in Spanish and your article is in French, for example, it has the ability to find the proper article, translate that article at the LLM level, and respond in Spanish, even though the source article is in a different language.
And this is very configurable in Helix, I would say, how you want it to work. We have seen that most customers wanted to detect what language you ask the question in, and you want the answer back in that same language. But nothing stops you from asking it to translate it while you ask the questions. You can say, how do I reset my browser cache? Respond in German if you want it in German, and you can say, how do you reset my browser cache? Respond in French, and you get the French translation. It's very flexible in that regard. So
yeah, one of our customers is one of the branches of government in Canada, and their language preferences are English or French only. So regardless of what language the question is asked in, respond in English or French. So it's prompt configuration at that point to say, if they ask it in Spanish, respond in English. If they ask it in French, respond in French. If they ask it in anything other than French or English, respond in English. They've got their prompts configured at that level, and all their source documents are in either French or English, and they have very little problems with the actual responses not being in the language they're looking for.
It's by law in Canada that you need to respond in English or French, right? And it's Canadian French and Canadian English. Okay, I think time is running. Should we take 1-2 more questions, and then we'll respond with in the document afterwards?
Definitely. I don't know, Des, do you want to pick which one? I'm obviously not the GPT expert.
There's one from Dirk, which I'm actually busy responding to right now. But if translation from one language to another is supported, which it is today, we've done this across multiple customers, different languages. Is there a limitation on what languages? And is this limitation based on the LLM or Gen AI provider? The short answer is, like I said, languages are translated automatically almost every day with these models today. And you are correct. The model itself is the limiting factor, right? Because remember, these models are trained on internet corpus, internet data, and what you'll find is, the most common languages that are there will obviously be prevalent, right? So if you think, Spanish, French, English, the most common languages, I mean, even Chinese, Japanese, all these languages are already in there, so it's able to respond to that quite easily. Where you find you're going to have lacking training or very poor translation will be on languages that are not commonly used on the internet, right? So if you think about, I know, Dirk, you're from South Africa, right? So some of the African languages in that area, they won't be available everywhere. So it's unlikely that those translations will be easily done, and that will be often documented there by the LLM provider itself.
Great. Thanks a lot for all these discussions. I think this is going to be a very valuable recording afterwards as well for many people. We have had almost 100 people on today, but I'm pretty sure we get many views afterwards. So thank you very much, LJ and Des, for joining us today. Do you want to sum up something?
Yeah,
Samantha?
well, yes, definitely. And I was going to say we will be sending out the content today. If any questions have been missed, we will be building a Q&A document to share with you. If you've got any thoughts or ideas, what you want us to do for the next sessions coming up, we're still thinking and providing. We'd love to hear from you. And again, I just echo the same comments that thanks, LJ and Des. I know we pulled you in last minute, but Kaf always has great ideas and says, I'm going to bring in some buddies. So thank you for that. We hope it's been useful. Last plug I do actually have, we do have Helix Roadshows still coming up. So if you are, I've seen quite a few people based in New York. We do have the New York Roadshow in November. We've also got Madrid and we've also got Frankfurt. We've also got another one that was added for Mexico. I will put all the dates out and I'll also send you the registration page. And additionally, I will share the last live prompting sessions we've done. For those that don't know, they do go onto our community page. So other than that, thank you for an interactive session and thank you to everyone that's joined today. And we will see many of you hopefully next month.